All right, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about building a high-functioning team. And so let me make sure you've got everything showing up on your side. There you go. All right, so you should be seeing the slides now. And so I'm Keith Mathis, so welcome. So today we're going to be talking about building a high-functioning Agile team. And one of the challenges that we're seeing is some of the same challenges that we actually saw several years ago when you first started seeing organizations switch from having a sole person who was kind of like the brainchild and made all the decisions to where you started seeing the shift over to more teaming. And so you started seeing some of these issues happen then, but once again, it was still so new that many people didn't take any particular steps to try to help this. Some organizations have realized that even though they're switching over to Agile, many of the internal things within the organization between the team and management sometimes struggles a little bit because management sometimes is still trying to step in and trump a lot of things that the Agile team is doing, just like they would in traditional. And the Agile team a lot of times maybe is not taking the responsibility they should over on their side. So those dynamics are happening right now. And that's what this is going to talk about to kind of help you a little bit with this. So here's our objectives. We have 3 objectives that we're going to be looking at real quick today within this hour. One, we want to talk a little bit about team dynamics, and many of you are exposed to this in everything we do today as teams. We're going to analyze some steps for being able to transition your team from a more spoon-feeding kind of atmosphere to one to where they're making more and more decisions. And then we want to talk about some of the best practices for high-performing teams. And what we're really wanting to do is to be able to put you on a trajectory to where you're able to start transitioning your team over time. Now, one of the challenges I think that comes with this is for those of you who are running both Agile and traditional projects is that you're changing authority structures from one to the other. In traditional, it's command and control. The project manager makes a lot of the decisions, has most of the power associated with that project. And then you get over on the Agile side, and if we're really doing Agile or Scrum, you notice that a team has most of the power, the team's making most of the decisions. So we're having to shift between those. And then, of course, if you have something in the hybrid realm, it's going to be something even a little bit different. Now, there's a lot of specialized teams that we've been exposed to over the years. We're talking operational teams, quality, project teams for Waterfall, for Agile, SME, subject matter expert, and that could be a team among themselves. And then even product development, whatever that output is going to be for our organization or that service output is going to be. We have different types of specialized teams. Every team can have their own creative dynamics, and there's anything wrong with that. And so this is not to say that everything has to be Agile. Forget that. That's not going to work on some of our projects either, but nor should everything be traditional either. So if you are making that switch to Agile, you probably have noticed some of these clumsy things and clumsy behaviors that we're going to be talking about. So let's start off with the fundamental and a foundation for this. First off, make sure the purpose of this team is clear. Now, that sounds like a no-brainer. I know they're working on a product or they're working on a particular service that has to be an output, but that team needs to understand what and why that project's happening. And sometimes that doesn't get communicated down very well. Understanding the purpose gives the team the big picture, and explaining the purpose helps not only explain the beginning goals of the project, but the ultimate outcome. And so that team needs to understand what that outcome is. There's no way that team can take responsibility that we're going to talk about a little bit later unless they understand what the ultimate goal is going to be, the ultimate outcome is going to be. And so the team has to understand the outcomes, and as they do, you're going to notice that they're going to be thinking more about outcomes than they are just doing something in the very next piece of work or the very next scheduled activity. So you're going to be looking at it from 3 different aspects here. You want to make sure everybody understands the goals, the activities, and even the results associated with something like that. Yes, thank you so much for your question, Waldo. Yes, you will be getting a copy of the video, not the slides, but you'll get a copy of the video, and you already have a handout of the PDF from Kim, which is your handout with an outline and also questions for if you're trying to use this with your group like many people do. So, but you will get a link to the video is what you'll get. So you're looking at the goals, the activities, and the results is what you're looking at. So you want to make sure the purpose is clear. So you're gaining the results is the outcome for doing a project. Results show whether the original purpose is correct, whether it needs some adjustments or realignment for success. And results create the product with specific features that meet the customer expectations. So many of you already are living in the world of dynamics where you're trying to switch from traditional because it's rooted in such heavy documentation, heavy change orders, to where you're trying to go to something that's a little bit more livable for you and the customer, which is on the Agile or the Scrum side. And so there's nothing wrong with that. But the challenge with that shifting, you probably have noticed, is that it's not just an easy shifting, meaning that we're going to do this one in Agile. It requires the laying of the foundation to get your team working differently in Agile. If we don't learn some of these things we're talking about today, then our team is going to be bumping along just like they did sometimes on the traditional side, or they're going to have a tendency to revert back to traditional and call the shots the way we would do it in traditional. And that's the last thing you're wanting to do. If you are making that switch from traditional over to Agile, you're doing it to minimize documentation, increase value to the customer, increase the speed to that customer. And what you're wanting to do is not get bogged down in as much bureaucracy for that particular project. And so if that team member doesn't understand and hasn't been trained and equipped for those, then they're going to revert back. And here comes the bureaucracy over on the Agile side, which will destroy your timing for something like that. Now, team performance will help in a lot of different ways. I thought this was a great quote, and this is from Fisher and Bellegarde. And so this is what they said about team performance with missed schedules. When teams have performance issues and get behind on the schedule, 90% of the breakdowns occur due to systems or organizational problems. Now, when we're talking about systems and organizational problems, we're really bringing in an avenue of professional development of that team. Well, who should be the person developing them? Well, on the traditional side, it would be the project manager. But on the team side, who would it be? Well, if you are the project manager and you're trying to make that transition, you might find yourself still having to train them on how they are to act and respond and what behaviors and actions they should have over on the Agile side. But the point is, you are having to make it okay for them to make decisions, because on the traditional side, many times people were not allowed to make as many decisions. They also go on and they talk about team performance with violated guidelines. And I thought this was a great quote from these folks as well. They said, guidelines are the rules the whole team has agreed to for the good of the team and the customers the team serves. Mature teams often address such issues openly, sharing their feelings, and if necessary, handing out sanctions as well. Now, what you're looking at here that Fisher and Bellegarde actually talked about was the beginning point of what you now see in PMBOK 7, which is the emphasis on a team charter. A team charter is how we're going to meet, how we're going to get along, how we're going to interact, when we're having our meetings, and what kind of guidelines and behavior do you want your team to demonstrate while they are attending these meetings at various times. And so the team charter is really being driven by PMBOK 7. And of course, anybody who's switching over on the new PMP, the team charter comes up even on the new PMP test. So PMI has definitely gone in that direction to try to emphasize that. But the purpose behind this is not just another document. The purpose is really to kind of guide and set some goals and standards for how we're going to act. In other words, I might disagree with you totally, but I don't have any right to be a jerk about it, or to storm out, or to not listen. I need to sit there, and as we negotiate or debate that issue, do it in a kind manner and not be a jerk about it. Now, what this means is that we have to understand both types of projects. In order for somebody to understand the Agile side, and we're making that switch, we have to understand we're bringing them from this past tradition and culture of traditional, which is very regimented. And so doesn't mean that it doesn't work. In some cases it does work, but it means that it's a whole different mindset. So you're going through initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing, and then you're handing that project off to the customer, complete at the end. That's the game plan. Where Agile and Scrum, totally different mindset, as you already know, and you're having to think differently, because if we go back to traditional, we're running a schedule, we're making making sure we hit deadlines on a schedule, but we know that the customer is really not getting anything until the end. And then what you're looking at with Scrum or any of the Agile flavors and frameworks, you're going to do a short, small plan. You're going to run a sprint or an iteration for 4 to 5 weeks, whatever it is. And at the end of that, you're handing something to that customer. That is a different mindset for your team to think, because the pressure, the performance has to be there, because they know that they're going to be handing something off to that customer shortly. Now, how do you transition the team there? Let me show you a transition here. So let's start with 30 days, 90 days, 120 days, and 180 days. Your team is not going to make the jump from traditional to Agile overnight. And many of the project managers or managers who have thought that have been mistaken, because what they thought is that we're going to tell everybody it's Agile, they can make all the decisions, and then our projects are going to run great and our customers are going to love us. That is great, but we can't hold hands and sing Kumbaya right yet, okay? So what happens is that we tell everybody we're switching to Agile, but once again, we haven't laid the foundation. Your team's not used to making decisions. They're used to getting permission for everything. They're not used to doing the estimates. They inherit the estimates and so forth. So a lot of those things have to be built into your team in order for them to take that responsibility. You probably have awesome people, but they're still not going to take the responsibility just out of the gate. It's going to take a little while. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to give them more authority over the time. So when you first start training them, maybe the first month, not a lot has changed. You're answering a lot of questions, you're making a lot of the decisions, you're coaching them. But the point is that you're trying to get them thinking like a person who does the estimates, who makes decisions, rather than a worker bee, okay? Then at 90 days, you should be looking at people who are making some of the decisions. By 120 days, they're making more decisions. And then in 180 days, they ought to be able to start making most of the decisions, except on the large crisis situations that obviously are brought together due to the project. And in those situations, you probably will always find your teams escalating that to management, and they should. And that's not saying they shouldn't. They should, because that's beyond the project and it's going to impact the program or portfolios or the organization at large. But you'll notice here with this that as we do this transition, we are equipping them and we're giving them time to mature in those different steps that we're giving them. So we're teaching them, we're allowing them to make more decisions. Now, if we as management jump in here and we start trumping every decision these 180 days, they're not going to do anything. They're going to come back and say, okay, tell me what you want me to do, and nothing's changed. So if you truly are really trying to make that shift, you're going to find yourself on the traditional side giving a lot of command and control, because that's how it's geared. And on the Agile side, giving a lot of grace, because they've got a learning curve. That curve is going to take a little while for them to learn how to do these things. So you're looking at 3 different sides to transitioning your team. You're looking at training them first. What ideas and what components are you going to train them with? You're looking at transitioning them over into those various steps that we just looked at. And then you're tracking their performance. And you can expect their performance in the beginning to be kind of clumsy, because once again, if this is brand new to them and they've never done it before, then you're going to discover that they're going to hedge a little bit. They're going to hesitate to make some of those decisions. So you want to train them, and you have to decide what your people need. Now, let me give you an example. Sometimes people will say, well, what do you think they need? I don't know. If I don't know your people, I don't know what they need. For one group, they might need all the components of estimating. They might need all the components of planning. They might need communication. One team might need that. The others might be great in estimating and communication, and they need examination in the area of risk. So your team is really going to be kind of customized in the training area of what you think they need to beef those skills up and being able to do that. Emotional intelligence, which many of you have read about from Project Management Institute, has become extremely big. And of course, that's a big team component, because you're learning how to read your fellow team members. They're learning how to read you. You're learning how to communicate. So the point is, the training has to be pretty customized to who your people are as far as the topic areas. So the systems to support high performing teams, we have to think about it from a larger standpoint. It's it's not just giving somebody an agile project and saying, go for it, Bubba. It's going to have to be that we transition them in. So you pick a project that's somewhere a medium or a smaller project that allows your team to start getting their feet wet on the agile side. And you start working with them the next few months. What your goal is not for them to be 100% agile by next Thursday. That's crazy. But it is to be able to start getting them to make more and more decisions. So you're looking at the social side of it, because they're going to have to act differently. They're going to have to respond differently. They're going to make decisions, and they have to be accountable for those decisions. And then they also have the learning component and also the work component. So as we look at these, so building relationships, interacting freely. You've got people who have ideas, but in the traditional side, maybe they've not used them. Maybe they've not shared a whole lot. On the learning side, we want them to be able to share the knowledge. Osmotic communication from just working with people. That's the idea that I'm learning from you just by being in the room with you on a day-to-day basis. And can we receive instruction back and forth? If it's always position oriented, like the highest person in the room is always the one making the decision, or the subject matter expert is always the one making the decision, then you're going to run across some problems in some of your team meetings. They're going to want that individual in every meeting. And so that we know that that's not feasible in most cases. So we want people to be able to receive instructions when they need to from a SME, but at the same time, they're not asking the SME to be at every crazy meeting, because they have some initiative themselves. And then from the work, in other words, judgment free and supporting the ideas. Now, judgment free doesn't mean we close our eyes to something we think is not going to work. It means that I don't think that you have an axe to grind. I don't think that you're proposing a particular solution that's way out in left field. Unless you really believe that that is a solution that's there. So I believe you first, and I trust you first, even though I might not agree with your idea at all. Your solution might not make any sense to me. And so we can debate that, but we do it in a humane way. We do it in a nice way, if that makes sense. Now, you've got good people who probably do this on a week-to-week basis. It's not somebody's not cantankerous, but every now and then there'll be that one person who's just cantankerous as all get out. And of course, people clam up. They won't do this. So for your agile team, you've got to be able to build that culture to where it's okay to disagree agreeably. It's okay for us to say, let's look at another possibility or another idea, and it'd be okay to do that. So what are you trying to train them in? Let me give you some suggestions. Maybe your people already know some of these things. And if they do, then this might not be you, okay? But one of the things, if you're switching over to Agile, or specifically Scrum, Scrum is going to have what's known as your product owner. Your product owner is an important role on the Scrum side, because what they do is they take care of the product backlog. Product backlog is going to be all your features, the functionality that project is needing. The product owner normally represents the customer. And so they spend a great deal of time back and forth with the customer, and then working with the team to let them know the priority of those features and functionality. So that's going to be one role that might need to be there. Second could be the Scrum Master. So they monitor more of the methodology, they facilitate the meetings, they support daily stand-up. But here's the thing, your Scrum Master really doesn't have a lot of power in most cases. They're watching, they don't tell the team what to do, they don't tell the product owner what to do, they're making sure that they're following that methodology. So sometimes when you see an organization put a project manager in charge as the product owner and the Scrum Master, and sometimes even together, they make that one role underneath the project manager. Those are competing ideas here. The product owner is representing value to the customer. Scrum Masters representing the facilitation of the methodology and framework. And so sometimes that's a competing role. That might not be the best role for that person. And then you've got the team over here to the side, which is supposed to be as high functioning as possible and making as many decisions as possible. So you want them to be able to do the estimates and use the sprint backlog and get to be able to develop and do whatever they need to do to get those particular products and services out to the customer as fast as possible. The other thing that you're wanting to do in training the team on the Scrum side, Scrum teams require the fundamentals of Scrum as well as advanced courses for the full framework. Your team is going to have to evolve. And so they might be good on the fundamentals, but the problem is you want them to be able to go to that next level. Your Scrum teams are there to produce. They're not there to ask permission. They're not there to wait on everybody to be on the same page. They're there to produce with their team. So if the team has consensus, they run with it. I mean, that's literally how fast it goes. So the fundamentals of Scrum would be Scrum basics, Agile basics, whichever you're wanting to look at, the roles, how the framework should function. And the intermediate Scrum or Agile would be additional experience, various roles filled with examples, templates, and best case project characteristics. And so what you're looking at here, you're trying to stair step them in the direction you're wanting them to go. And so what you might do is you start looking at developing the team is you start looking at it through the eyes of what's required of my team members. So it's customized to your team. Or what kind of business skills do they need? Is it technical skills they need? For an example, or they might be using a different type of software. They might be using Microsoft Project or Primavera on the traditional side, but now when they jump over on the Scrum side, they're using Jira or they're using some other type of software. So they might need training on a software. And then if you looked at the interpersonal side comes at it from the direction of, okay, what kind of personal skills, interpersonal skills do they need in being able to get along with each other and being able to disagree nicely is might be a piece of it right there. So let's look at how some of this would be structured here. So we've got our sponsor and we've got our project manager who's the decision maker, and we've got the customer, and we've got the team, the project team, which are the worker bees. Nothing wrong with this. This is found every day in traditional. And so, but we can't keep that same structure when you get ready to move over to Agile, because once again, remember, Agile is supposed to be high functioning. They're making the decision, not asking permission, and their goal is execution. The goal on traditional is command and control. Nothing changes without going through change control. And so you're talking about structure on the traditional side. There's a lack of structure on the Agile side. Now, it doesn't mean no structure, just a lack of it. Now let's look at this. So now we start looking at it to where we start moving toward Agile. So notice what happened. The project manager moves from being the person making the decision to being a support and a coach. You'll notice that the team starts making more and more decisions. Now you're not flipping a coin. You understand what I'm saying. And it's not like today we make all the decisions as the PM, and then tomorrow, guess what? You guys are Agile, make whatever decision you want. It's not like that. You're transitioning that over, but that is where you're going with this. Your sponsor's role might stay very close to the same. Your customer's role might not really change, but the big difference here is going to be between the PM and the team. So let's go a little bit further, even more here. So now you've got your project manager and you've got your product owner who has limited authority, and you have the project team with limited authority. So what does that mean? Well, as you've transitioned more, your product owner has control over what features you're doing on these sprints and what order, because they represent the customer. The product owner functions very, very similar with some of the components of a business analyst, actually, because they have to eat, breathe, and understand the scope of work from that customer. They have to understand what the pecking order of those features are, and those features could be changing on a weekly basis. But they don't have authority to dictate time or estimates to the project team. They just have the ability to dictate the order of those features or user stories, whatever they're counting. On the project team, they have limited authority as well. They don't have authority to tell the product owner exactly what order, but they have the authority on the estimates, and they have the authority on being able to say how much work they can possibly get out in that next 4-week sprint. So you can see the need for those two to be able to work together. Now, the real world is that there's going to be times the product owner wants something and the team pushes back and says, okay, before we can build that, we have to have these other two things here. And so that that kind of negotiation is going on as they do that. But in theory, this is exactly what should be happening here. And then the next one here, if you look at it from a Scrum Master role, here we go. From a Scrum Master role, you might have a Scrum Master that you've brought into it on the Agile side. You have your product owner who has authority over the backlog, your team who has authority over the estimates. But notice the project manager role. You left the project manager there, And so what would be their role? Well, project manager's role would be obviously to coach and be kind of a servant leader to everybody. But on the flip side of this, they would be reporting from an agile situation to management. Now, the challenge that you get into, and many project managers would notice this, is that many times when an organization has had traditional project management, they've spent their time with CPI and SPI and all of those types of calculations. Well, Agile doesn't do that. They do burn up and burn down charts. They're using information radiators, which are very public boards of how and where the project is at any given time. But the project manager would find themselves having to translate a burn up and burn down chart over to those metrics that management has been tracking on all the projects. And that would be a little bit of a dynamic change. And you have to think through how you're going to be able to do those. Now let's talk for a moment about guidelines for creating the high performance teams. This is the principles that we're using here: clear roles, articulate communication, efficient processes, clear-cut escalation path, and measurable goals and objectives. And so we have to be realistic. They're not going to produce super fast in the very beginning because it's clumsy. But over time, you've got good people, you've got good teams that are going to be producing at a high rate. It will take them 2 or 3 sprints in most cases to kind of get the feel of this. The first sprint is going to be clumsy. They've never done it before, and they're not sure what the rules are. And then the second sprint will be better. The third sprint is where you'll start picking up some of your efficiencies from some of the folks. Now, understanding the human performance side, you're trying to move away from the thought that a random event causes bad performance. And so what you're trying to do is look at it through the eyes that performance consists of many events, many behaviors happening at the same time. And so you're not just looking at that one person is going to be the person who makes everything happen positively on that project. It's a chain of events. So as you're training your people on the team side, you're wanting them to have that interaction. And so you're trying to create events and behaviors which support a positive outcome. And so you're trying to design performance metrics that make sense and don't humiliate the people. And you know that they're not going to make all the performance measurements at times, but what you're going to do is when they don't make them, you talk about what didn't work and you move on. It's not a blame game kind of situation unless you just have something or someone who is just horribly underperforming, and you would deal with that as a performance issue. But that would be down the road. That sure wouldn't be in the beginning because it's going to be clumsy for everyone. People don't know what the rules are for everything. Some people also are not motivated, but this is not always the case with lower performance. Some people, they're performing slowly are lower only because they don't understand the rules. Once they start understanding how Agile works, they will start picking up the pace and doing great job. So you're trying to change the thoughts, the feelings of the people, and you're trying to watch them change as they try to work here. Remember, they went from command and control. They maybe gave input, but it was limited input. Who had the authority? The project manager. Who made the final decision? Project manager. And now you're switching to a system to where Agile or Scrum, they're making most of those decisions. Who has the authority? They do. Who's responsible? They are. And so that's going to take a little bit of time to make that transition. You're trying to look at the low performance. Is it a lack of skills or is it a lack of motivation? So if it's in the early stages, you want to go from the aspect that it's low skills because they've never done it before. Now, if they've been performing and they've been hitting these metrics that you've been tracking, and now all of a sudden their performance drops, it's not a skill issue. Why? Because they already hit it. They've already been following it. And now that it's dropped, this is going to be a performance issue. And so you want to deal with that gap when and if that happens. But in the beginning, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt that the low performance that's happening is a skill issue. So let's look at some considerations for high performance. Give the team ownership of the decisions and the outcomes. Support fast execution of rules, regulations. Build processes and systems that are lean, meaning the least amount of steps as possible, least amount of documentation possible. Guide the team, but move away from micromanaging them. Encourage the team to think and challenge the status quo. We've got to do it differently. We've got to look at it differently. Inspire continuous learning from any educational gap, and then minimize the number of meetings the team must attend. And so you can't meet these men and women to death on these teams. You can't put them in these teams and then they're having to meet like crazy, because that's going to slow down the production of their output. So you're wanting them to minimize the number of meetings they're going to have and shorten those meetings. to where it's going to be something that's worthwhile, but it's not something that's going to suck down all their day or all their afternoon. But we talked about clear roles, understanding the role one plays on a project. It's beneficial to him or her, taking responsibility. If a person's unclear about their role, they hesitate. And that's what you don't want to have happening. Think about yourself. If you're unsure, you will hesitate until you kind of get the lay of the land, and then you will pick up and start going. So caution is fine, but unclear roles make everybody too cautious. And that's what you're not wanting. If you're switching to Agile, you're doing it, and you know it's not a silver bullet, but you're trying to do it to bring value to your customer faster, earlier than what you normally would. And then what you're trying to do is articulate communication. Communication messages sometimes get blocked or distorted because people understood the message. So you're wanting to make sure communication is free, easy, clear. And so it focuses on the message and make it as simple as possible, and then presenting that message at the proper time. And so once again, this isn't more memos and more emails. Oh my gosh, just poke us in the eye over those things. We don't want any of that junk. We want it to be verbal as much as possible. And you might say, well, wait a second, we're trying to do teams, but we're trying to do them at a distance. That's good. Many people are. And so that you still do face-to-face meetings with them or face-to-face discussions where we can see each other and talk about some of these things. Efficient processes, we referred to that. This is making the processes of an organization efficient as possible. And this is going to take some time because you've got some old processes that people are maybe following for traditional project management that really are obsolete for Agile. But nobody's ever challenged it. Nobody's ever talked about it. So sometimes what happens is we get lazy on updating the processes. And this isn't a criticism. This is just kind of an observation. We have things that we've been doing these 15 steps for 40 years, and we don't need all 15 steps, but nobody's challenged it. So we have to try to run some of these processes in a manner that's going to move through the steps that we really do need and bypass those steps that are really just sucking down time and not accomplishing anything. Now, there does need to be an escalation path, though. So, escalation of a problem that is beyond the team does need to be discussed. And so that project manager and maybe even management has to be involved. They're going to happen, and they're going to happen with Agile projects just like they will with traditional. So escalation includes problems which are blocked by people, processes, resources, which are beyond the power of the team. So normally when you're talking about escalation, you're not escalating it just for permission. You're not doing that. You're escalating it because it's beyond the team's power. And so a clear escalation path reduces the struggles because people understand what the steps need to be and when this problem is so big that management needs to be involved in this. We talked about measurable goals and objectives. Now we talked about making them baby steps in the beginning while you're trying to train people. But we need to measure a variety of goals, not just what we've always measured. The goals you measure for Agile will probably be different. The challenge you're going to have is trying to translate them over and to the box that management's going to need for their projects, because they've done it in traditional. They've got those boxes really, really locked in. And so that's going to be one of the challenges. So quantifiable metrics are clear. They move away from subjective statements and measurements. And a lot of times people push back on Agile and Scrum and say, well, we can't have quantifiable. That's not true. Well, we don't have a due date. That's now that we're doing Agile, and we don't have documentation. None of that's true. You do have documentation. Documentation's just less. You do have due dates. You can, after you've run 2 or 3 of these sprints, by the 3rd sprint, you can start coming up with an average. And it's called a velocity, an average of how many features or user stories or story points, whatever you're counting. By the third sprint, you ought to be able to have an average of how many you're producing every 4 weeks. Take those 4 weeks and start projecting out. Now, it's not locked in on a calendar. You know, management can't take the next 15 sprints and say this one ought to be done by June 15th and this one ought to be done by July 15th and so forth. But you can project out that somewhere within this range of between this date and this date, that project's going to be finished. And that's going to help management be able to accept this much more realistically. Challenges for changing from a waterfall to a Scrum. probably in your situation, you probably have noticed that some projects are still going to need the waterfall and the traditional type, and some will work better with agile product development, software. Some of these things that you're producing and a quick output, Scrum might be the best, but there's going to be some for traditional. It doesn't have to be an either or kind of thing. You and your people can and should understand both of these. So you can observe what project that you're working on and put the methodology that works best for that type of project. The role of the project manager does have to be a discussion. Will they be changed from a project manager to a product owner? For me, and you might disagree with me, for those of you who have some experience in this, it looks to me like the product owner is probably one of the best roles. If I have to have a project manager function in any way, a product owner is probably the closest that I think the transition is less. And you might disagree with me, and that's okay. But I think the product owner and the project manager might be better. But the project manager's struggle will be that they still function as if they don't have authority over the team, even though they are the project manager. And so that is a role that you might look at with some restrictions. Is the trust between the organizational leadership and teams high enough for the transition? And so this would look more at a systems and a process type thing for your organization. If management doesn't trust the people and they think that they'll all be lazy and not try to do a good job, then this transition, you're going to find that people are trying to micromanage everybody, because it's going to be very much a theory X kind of mindset. Everybody thinks that they're lazy. But in general, you will see that if management trusts those teams and you pan pick your first team to do this and start working with this, and then you're going to learn from that team, this can be a great transition to where you're running both methodologies at your organization. And is management willing to allow this level of authority to be given to other people? That's going to be a true question that has to be talked about. So trust inside the team. Do we have trust? So trusting people to do their job to support other team members doesn't just happen. It's created with that purpose. I need to trust first and then verify that you're doing what it is that we're supposed to be doing. So it's built over time as we prove that loyalty, as we do what we say we're going to do. And here's the thing. Your team's working on it. They think it's going to be done June 15th. It's Agile, it's Scrum, and all of a sudden you have a hiccup, just like we have in traditional. So it's not like traditional doesn't have these. What do? You escalate that to management. And you say, okay, listen, I know we're on path from our velocity to be able to produce these features by these dates, and that's what we're looking at. But we've had a hiccup, and here's what's going on. So communication is still going to be the same piece that you're delivering to management, even on the Agile side when you have a hiccup, just like on the traditional side. So let's talk about trust real quick. Trust has many common qualities. Contributing to team performance. Competition among team members is healthy and not harmful, and that's one of the important topics that we need to talk about down the road. When one team member struggles, others are willing to help that person. That's just a different mindset. The entire team tries to function as one. Motivation is expressed by and each team member, and when criticized, the team supports each team member. And so what happens is that somebody could be struggling over here and the team's trying to bail the project out, knowing that down the road somebody else could be struggling and they're going to be bailing that person out. So how do we size up potential team members? People who interact and complement the talents of others, that's going to be a great team member. You already have people like this on some of your teams. After working with someone, the ability to anticipate the behaviors, actions, decisions one will make. You anticipate, you've seen them in difficult situations, and how did they respond? Individuals who understood the strengths and weaknesses of others, but they try to be complementary on supporting those weaknesses to where they can still get work done, and then allowing the person with those strengths to actually run that section of the project. There's tactics that support a higher performance too. Teams create their own plans and estimates. And in a true agile situation, that's going to be a big piece. Expand the framework of reference so the team can gain information, knowledge from other stakeholders. That means opening up communication to where the team can talk to who they need to talk to find out the information. So we don't want to close down communication for the team because they'll be making decisions without all the right information. Escalate to management any area of resistance from their resolution. Stay positive when engaging with the team. Even when low performance is discussed, try to stay as optimistic as positive. And you already know that this transition is going to take several months in order to get everybody going. Now, people who act and complement the talents of others. There's no lone ranger in high performing teams. Everybody is on the team is trying to support everybody else on that team. Nobody is sitting there, just give me my cubicle and let me program, or let me build my little piece of the project and leave me alone. That there's no such thing as that. And so that mindset doesn't work with where you're trying to take this group. So they have to be able to complement the talents and sometimes even complement the weaknesses to where someone else is stronger in that area than what that one person is working with that particular skill set. Now, the ability to anticipate the behaviors, actions, decisions one person is going to make. So team members need strong people skills to increase the ability to read a person and anticipate their future actions. That's one of the reasons why I think PMI has pushed so hard for emotional intelligence. It allows you to be able to know how you're coming across. It allows you the capability to be able to encourage and give people some grace in those early stages, to where as you're talking about things, you're talking about the issue, but you're not trying to go for the juggler and stab them in the heart because you've caught them doing something that's not as productive. Individuals who understand the strengths and weaknesses of others is going to be imperative. We have to be able to measure correctly what's the strengths this person brings to the table, what's the weakness. And evaluation doesn't mean getting that person off of the team. It means using that person in the area of strength and helping them develop in those areas of weakness. All of us have strengths and weaknesses. We will develop on some of those areas as we work with other people. Weak areas are reduced by coaching, by training. All of those components help these people because we all have areas we can grow in. Now, there's some tactics specific to virtual teams. Now, over the holidays, this Christmas, the program I'm working on is going to be managing virtual projects with virtual teams. And so this is an area I'm really trying to support by early of 2023 with a new program. So virtual teams are not co-located and do not meet face-to-face with regularity, which goes against Agile and some of your Scrum principles. But this seems to be a common thing that's happening right now, with that more and more organizations are going virtual and more organizations are just using video equipment to be able to talk with people, but they are not co-locating everyone. And part of that, I think, is a skeleton crew where we don't have enough people working at some of the organizations as well. And that might be your situation too. But anyway, the lack of face-to-face interaction means team members have to be clear on their actions, on their assignments, and what they're communicating to people as much as possible. Now, statistics on remote workers reveal that more than 4.7 million people in the United States work remotely at least half time. 44% of the companies do not allow remote work. Globally, 16% of all companies are fully remote, according to Owl Lab's study on May the 11th of 2022. So this is a really new, this was the newest study I could find when doing the research on this. Now, what I think you're going to probably see is you'll see some of these companies start opening up. More and more companies are going to remote, or at least part-time remote, and many of your millennials are demanding this for that home life balance. And so I think you're going to see this grow. But the point I'm getting at is that we are seeing remote work. Many of you work remotely. Many of you also are doing it maybe on a part-time basis. Now, virtual teams require multiple engagement sources to verify that all goals and objectives are understood. Engagement means how it's communicated to us and making sure that we see the clear path. Give employees the right equipment. Goal setting is fundamental. Delegate the task properly. Use multiple communication channels. Organize online meetings regularly. Take advantage of PM tools. Recognize achievements and reward top performance. So there's a lot of things that are clustered together that helps people be able to make the right decisions and be able to realize this is an important goal that we're supposed to be going after. It's not just something some manager said or some product owner said or some team member even said. Now, Microsoft suggests helping team members organize by creating checklists of activities or tasks when assigning them to a team member. Now, a few months ago, I did a webinar on creating checklists because I'm starting to realize that, especially remotely, having a verbal meeting with someone or face-to-face virtually is great, and then follow it up with your email and a checklist of the 5 things you want that person to achieve. And there's something about excuse me, about that checklist that really helps solidify that. And so some sample could be interview the customer about the change. And we just gave you a sample checklist here. Draft a scope of the sprint. Discuss how many features the team can complete in 4 weeks. Schedule the sprint review. Send out invitations for the sprint review. Schedule the sprint retrospective. Now, many of you already do checklists. You maybe do checklists. You're a list person anyway. I'm that way. So I've got my list. There's something exciting about marking that off with my black marker, you know. And then follow-up, management follow-up with workers once they work on a designated assignment is imperative. You want to see the caliber of work that they're doing. In Agile, it also needs follow-up from some roles to verify understanding, compliance. There's going to be all those issues that somebody's going to have to be following up. They're not just slinging it out the door to the customer. Somebody's having to follow up to verify that what's going out the door is still quality work that we're sending out. Product owners have to follow up with the team, verify they understood the sprint plan and the order of the features. Teams use the sprint demo to verify the customer requirements work and meet the desired outcomes, and customers engage with the product owner to ensure they understand all the priorities. So you'll notice here that there's an element of follow-up on all sides. Somebody's overlooking something else to make sure what's being done is meeting what they need. It has to be have a balanced approach, and workers require different levels of follow-up. If there's too much follow-up, people feel they're being micromanaged. If there's too little follow-up, people feel others do not care. And so if you've ever had somebody micromanage you, oh my goodness, just poke us in the eye, because that's horrible. I taught for a university a few years ago that I quit. And so they recruited me. I taught for them for about 1.5 years, and it was great. And so they changed my supervisor. And my new supervisor was going to micromanage everything you did, including every email I was to write. I had to send it to her for approval before my email could go out to my students. And I thought, I'm not doing this. I mean, I've been teaching, doing online teaching for grads and doctoral students for a lot of years, and I'm not doing this. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't grow in those areas, but that wasn't a growth type of thing. It was a control thing. So I finished out the term and left. I thought, forget that. I don't want to teach for that school. And so I continued to teach for the schools that value what I brought to the table. Now, the other thing that will help you too on the Agile side to keep in mind is you might have to change how you communicate public communication or visual communication. And so in traditional, you're using all the software and emails and everything. And not that you're not going to use some of that over on the Agile side, but information radiators are a key in the Agile communication. So a radiator is a board to communicate to anyone who walks by. And so it's going to be, usually it's high visibility, low tech, but it allows you an opportunity to see that. To see what's happening. Steve, you're right. The key to communication is to avoid excessive multi-symbolic lexicography when singularity. Too funny, buddy. Too funny. You've got that $100 toilet paper, don't you, partner? You got so that you're using the big words. But yeah, we're trying to communicate, and so you're wanting to make it as simple as possible. And so characteristics of an information radiator, many of you have it. I've seen it on your boards at some of your locations on site. It has to be large enough to be seen at a distance, needs to be clear and understandable. It also has to be consistently updated by somebody, and it's located in high traffic, high place. And so it could be your Kanban board, it could be a task board. It depends on what you're trying to communicate. But the point is, it allows you to walk by and know what's happening on that project or those series of projects. Sometimes people will do it on those at all times. And I guarantee you, management will walk by and take a look at that. And then types of information radiators. Let me kind of break them down a little bit because they are and can be different. You've got product roadmap You've got the story map board. You could do it from a Kanban board, a feature board, a rollout board, a testing board, burn down, burn up charts, task boards. It depends on what you're trying to emphasize, but the point is all of these are right, and you and your team are talking about what type of board do you need. So if, for an example, if your portion of the work was mainly on the quality side and you did testing, you might have an information radiator on the board where with you and your people to where you're testing all these things on the, let's say, software, and you've got one that deals with nothing except the testing sequence of how you're handling each of these features and functionality or pieces of software. And that's fine. And that's exactly what it would be. That way people could walk by and know what's happening with your part of the job. Where someone else, it might be more on the programming side. What's happening with them programming these pieces. Continuous improvement is always going to be an emphasis. So I wanted to go ahead and include this because this is a huge deal, you know, with PMI, and it needs to be with every organization. How do we get better? And so it can improve the processes, the systems, the procedures, the skills, core competencies, all of these. How can I get better? It also is a high function for the teams. You want the teams to do the least amount possible, but be able to meet the requirements. And so that's a huge mindset change because you're wanting them to think in a lean mindset. What's the most minimal I can do? And also teams must continue to improve as they move away from management, deciding and allowing the team members to determine what's the correct solution or what, you know, and letting them follow through what their decisions are going to be huge for them. It also allows them to look for better and more streamlined ways of doing things. And your millennials in particular and your Generation X, as more and more baby boomers leave, some of the traditional stuff that we've had to do is going to change. Your Gen Xers don't like it. Your millennials don't like it. They're going to come up with better processes, better steps. And so it's going to strengthen everything you're trying to do because they're not connected to the old way of doing it. They're connected to let's do it with something that makes sense with where we are right now. And so it only works though if everybody takes it seriously and tries to improve themselves personally as well as improving the processes. And so that helps in all those areas. Now, let me mention a couple of things to you real quick. One of the things that we have coming up December, in our December webinar, we're going to talk about changes to the PMP test and certification. That's going to be on December 9th. They made changes in December of 2021. They also adjusted it a little bit in January of 2022. And in February of 2023, they will have another adjustment of the PMP test and the material. And so the material is excellent. If you've ever struggled with taking the PMP test or didn't take it because of all the calculations, there are no calculations in that test now. And so how long they're going to leave it like this, I don't know, but there's no calculations in it right now. So if you're thinking about doing this test and you hated the idea of the calculations, unless if you're an engineer, you wanted the calculations, sorry. But if you hated the thing of the calculations, that's it. The other thing that we will have is that we will have our final PMP boot camp is December 5th through 8th for 2022. It will be virtual. And so that will close out all of our boot camps for this year. And then in December 12th through 14, that will be our PMI-ACP boot camp. So this is the Agile Certified Professional Boot Camp. We're not sure if we're going to run it next year. We did not give it a date for next year because they're making changes to this in February of 2023. And so we're not sure what the changes are and what the material is going to look like. And so we have not booked anything for running this certification for next year until we're able to see more of what the changes are. So if you're wanting to get the ACP based on what we know now, and the ACP is it's easier than your PMP test, but this would be our last boot camp. It will be done virtual, December 12th through 14th. Take a look at the boot camp for the ACP and get into the class because we've got a small class. And once again, I don't know for sure that we will even offer this in 2023 due to the changes and things. The other thing I want to mention to you that we have coming out, let me open this up where I can see some of you guys, is one of the things that we have coming out. We are kicking off something that we are going to be launching it on TikTok, and it will be coming out to all of everyone who's on our mailing list as well. It's called the 7-Minute Project Manager. And so this will be a short 3 to no longer than 7 minutes, obviously, but it'll be under 7 minutes, roughly about 3 to 5 minute project management tip. And that project management tip is giving you some kind of idea about project management, some piece of teaching, and then some action items to follow. And so we're cutting those right now. And so Kim and the team put a real cute opening graphic for us called the 7-Minute Project Manager. And so we'll be launching that. You'll get a chance to see it by being on our mailing list. And so you'll get a copy of that as well. So anyway, that's what we're looking at here. So it's good. I hope you guys are doing well. You've got Thanksgiving coming up, so it's going to be a great time for you and your family. And of course, then you've got Christmas, the best time of the year. And so that's going to be awesome. All right, so let me open it up for any questions that you might have. And so let me do that. What questions might you have about anything we've talked about this morning? Anybody? Steve asked the question. He said, "State of Kansas requires Waterfall," and he said, "Do you have it?" But the vendor is using Scrum. The vendor is using Scrum, and the challenge you get into is that the vendor is using Scrum, and probably in the contract or at least in the discussions, you probably had to talk about how you're going to be able to translate the Scrum processes and metrics really over to align with the CPI and SPI. Because Kansas does have the waterfall approach, the vendor is doing that. So you've probably discovered that's happening. It's working to work in a version of Scrum. That's what I had heard too, Larry. And so so we actually just got the contract from Kansas to do another year of project management training for them. Got it last night. And so to come back and do another year of work with those guys. And so I'd heard the same thing you heard too. I haven't seen anything, but that's what I heard as well. But the point is that if you have a vendor who's doing Scrum, you're not really trying to mess with the way they're doing it internally, but they've got to be able to help us support us in how we're going to communicate that. I think it's monthly or quarterly to your PMO. So that's a discussion to have with that vendor of some way. Other questions that you might have? You guys on Missouri that have been talking to me about coming in and doing training, we've just gotten the contracts from SHI. And so we'll be getting those all signed and sent back this week for SHI as well, so that we can do Missouri training for you guys. So that ought to work out pretty well. So we'll be able to do that. Okay. Any other questions? All right, well, let me thank you so much for being here. I hope you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving, a Merry Christmas, and I'll see you next month as we talk about changes to the PMP. And if you look on our website or look at something Kim has sent you, one of the things to consider is that we've already listed our 2023 topics, and you can sign up for all of those. And one link signs you up for everything for next year, and you don't have to do that per month. And so that will give you an opportunity to not have to mess with sign up every time you turn around. Okay. Look, God bless you guys. Hope you have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy your time with your families. Bye, everybody. See ya.